All right. Good morning, everybody. Band meteorologist John Kemper here. We're going to let a few more people trickle in here and go ahead and start getting into some of the forecast risks we have. We've got a threat for a storm cluster to develop across portions of Iowa and Wisconsin as we get into later this evening, overnight, and then that's going to impact Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky as we get into tomorrow here. But going to let a few more people filter in here. Thanks for joining. Wanted to pop on and provide an update here before we get into the weekend here. Good morning, Brian. Thank you for joining us here. We're just gonna wait about another minute longer here for some more people to trickle in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Give me a shout here in the comments. I've got Hope pulled up here on the left of me, helping me out, making sure that you guys can hear me as well and are seeing the screen. But let's go ahead and get into this latest in terms of the severe risk. So this is what we sent out to our Clarity clients this morning. Some of you have seen a similar looking map here as we've been sharing that over the past couple of days. These risks don't only encompass necessarily the afternoon and evening, but also the early morning hours here as well. I'll show a favored simulated radar tracking this cluster from the northwest to the southeast here, but it's these possible and likely zones that, in our opinion, are going to reflect where that cluster is going to be here, especially in terms of the widespread nature of it. I would say in general, the risk for damaging winds and isolated large hail in the yellow zones, and then that orange zone is where we are a little bit more concerned for the risk of some 70-mile-per-hour plus wind gusts, in addition to perhaps even a couple of tornadoes here as well. I think that risk is a little bit lower, but it's that damaging wind threat being widespread and at its greatest potential, especially into those orange areas here. Now, for those of you in St. Louis, Bowling Green, kind of on the green outskirts, I definitely think there's still some severe risks for you. I just think it's a little bit more lower end and likely a little bit more scattered here. So this pattern has been a little bit more tricky to iron out the timing details. And unfortunately, as we get into looking at the latest timing, I'm going to start here as we get into midnight Saturday. There are going to be some tweaks and fine tuning that we are going to have to do as we get later into this afternoon and evening. And as we get further into tomorrow morning. So make sure to go ahead and like our page, share it with a couple friends here as we get into the forecast update. I really want to emphasize that while I don't think that this is going to be the worst severe outbreak we've ever seen by any means, there's definitely some decent potential for widespread damaging winds. So make sure to share it with a friend here as we kind of get going. And I will take your guys' questions as we get kind of beyond the forecast brief here real quick. I want to go through the timing, and then we'll start getting into some of the more fine tuning of the details here for your specific location. So right now we're taking a look at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Eastern time frame on Saturday. We're expecting storms to begin to organize just north of the I-80 corridor, northern Iowa, and into central Wisconsin. Now, I do think that as a result here, there will be some time refinements that we'll have to make here as this line slowly begins to organize. It's a little bit difficult as it's really not going to get going until after 11 p.m. tonight, midnight. And so as that begins to evolve, you're going to start to notice it form into a little bit more of a line or storm cluster getting into Madison, Milwaukee, and then on the outer parts of Chicago as we get towards 10 a.m. Eastern time frame. Now, this is going to be moving through the area late morning into the early afternoon. And right now we are favoring this to maintain intensity, perhaps even intensify a little bit more as we get into that early afternoon. But in terms of severe risks associated with it, I would expect to see some severe thunderstorm warnings along the leading edge of this for damaging winds of 60 miles per hour, some isolated instances of hail, but definitely going to be a situation in which the risks for any type of wind gusts are going to be widespread kind of along the forward part of this line here. Now, we continue to push this forward here, 11 a.m. Eastern time frame, 12 p.m. Eastern time frame, and 1 p.m. Eastern time frame. And just to switch that back here for you guys to see, so for Chicago, that's 12 p.m. Central time frame here. But I do think that the line at this point is stretching all the way down from central Michigan into approaching the region area and then Springfield. I think one risk area that we will need to keep an eye on for some of these risks is Springfield, St. Louis. And again, that's where we're in that green low end zone. But I do think we can see that line extend a little bit further to the south and allow for some of those damaging wind gusts to still be possible here. Now, one thing I want to note here before I move this a little bit further into eastern Illinois, central Indiana, and southern Michigan is that on radar, especially with these setups that move through in the early afternoon, we saw one very similar to this last year around the end of June, and same with a couple years ago. Even though on radar it might not look like much, it might not have the red and purple colors, indicating the heavier rainfall, these types of setups usually are associated with more of those rolling, damaging wind gusts. So it'll sound different than more of a scattered cell or pop-up that's sitting over your area where it's a quick, brief gust that moves through in 30 seconds. Sometimes these gusts can roll through for about a minute and a half at least. So it's definitely going to sound a little bit different. And that's because these types of gusts in widespread nature typically are the ones that are most associated with damage here. So as we continue to push this through 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m., and 4 p.m. Eastern time frame, so this is stretching all the way from Mount Vernon, Illinois, all the way through Indianapolis into Fort Wayne and just between Lansing and Detroit here. Now, as it's pushing from northwest to southeast here towards the afternoon, we are favoring the line to begin to intensify a little bit more. It has something called a low to mid-level jet sitting behind it that's going to help it to expand and also have that potential for damaging winds. Notice how this particular simulated radar is kind of showing these little curves within the line. Those are usually what we refer to as Boeing segments that with these more strong or powerful storm clusters can have the better potential for those damaging wind gusts of 60, 70 plus here. So definitely something that we will need to watch for sure. I would highly anticipate some type of severe thunderstorm watch, whether it's from NWS or whether it's from your band meteorologist on team. We might issue one several hours out ahead of this as we start to see this beginning to push from the northwest to the southeast here. In terms of other severe risks, I do think there can be some isolated hail possible. I don't think this setup is necessarily large hail all across the line, and I can't rule out a few embedded tornadoes. But again, I think it's the damaging wind risk that's going to be the main story for this area here. We continue to take this out 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m. Eastern time frame here. Now, notice on this particular simulated radar, and this is what I don't want us to get caught on here, while it is weakening some of the storms, and I do think some weakening will be likely as we get into the evening here towards the Ohio River, Evansville, Louisville, Cincinnati, Columbus, I do think that there can still be a gust front along the leading edge that can produce gusts of 60. So even though it might seem like it's dying as it's getting into Ohio and Kentucky, I think this is sometimes where models struggle a little bit, and they have as of late. They start to kill off the storms a little bit too early. So definitely a risk that we will have to watch. 8 p.m., 9 p.m., and then 10 p.m. Eastern time frame. Now, I want to talk about a couple of risks to the forecast as a whole that might change things before I take your guys' questions. So let's start all the way back up here for a second as we get towards the 10 a.m., 11 a.m. Eastern time frame. I do think that there can be a little bit more of some scattered storm coverage in this region here as we get into the late morning hours. So for those of you that have outdoor events or activities planned, farmers markets, I've been talking with a lot of our Clarity clients about some of the event planning for Saturday morning. I am concerned that there can still be some scattered storms or downpours in the area. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're going to be severe. I think perhaps a few stronger gusts, maybe of 30 to 40, but more of just these AM storm types and downpours that we've seen the past couple of mornings. But the reason why that's relevant to this forecast is that if we have more storm coverage in this area here, I do think that one of the issues that I have is if that does not clear out, it might actually help to keep the storm line. I still think it's going to be severe, but not as intense. I think the 70 plus mile per hour risks might be a little bit less. So there is some room for optimism. If you're not excited about widespread severe storms, there are some risks to this pattern that might be able to lessen that severe risk a little bit. Right now, I'm not seeing that as much, but it's definitely something to watch for. Now, as we get more towards 3 p.m. Eastern time frame and the environment begins to intensify a little bit more, I do think there is another risk that we need to watch for in the afternoon, and that's more towards eastern Indiana, Cincinnati, Columbus, Ohio, that we actually can see a couple supercells try to fire up here as well. Now, when I say supercells, what I mean is that I do think that we can see this would be the area where I think we would have the better potential for tornadoes and hail. Again, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a tornado outbreak by any means. This line that you're seeing right here, that is the main event, but it's definitely a risk that we're going to have to watch out for here. So that's our current thinking in terms of timing for Saturday. I will get into a little bit more on Sunday here in just a second, but I want to go ahead and go back and share with you our severe storm threat map here, kind of going over our latest thinking for risk areas. Again, damaging winds is going to be the primary threat. And something else, I've just quickly skimmed through the comments here. I want to go ahead and toggle up our rainfall over the past couple of days. We'll go 3 days here across the region, especially southern Indiana, southern Illinois, but really across the board been a fairly active pattern. One of the risks that we start to see here with some of those heavier rainfalls is that that's going to make it a little bit easier for those trees to get knocked over onto power lines. So in terms of your issues here with power outages and trees and wind, I definitely think that's going to be a concern here. And while northern Indiana, northeastern Illinois hasn't gotten as much rain, more south of the I-70 corridor, still going to be a risk here for sure. So definitely also want to point out here as well, and then I will start answering some of these questions here, is that I believe that Hope's already put this link in the chat as well here, or in the comment section. But this is a perfect time for you guys to sign up for our new Clarity Home package, and even our pro service as well, where you can talk to a meteorologist 24/7. So this is a part of my normal operation, day-to-day tasks. I'm usually talking with clients for most, if not all, of my shift here, helping them make decisions, and also putting out some of these graphics, nowcasts, which I'm sure you guys have seen plenty of examples of over the past couple of days. We'll share a few more of those with you tomorrow, but that's so that you can stay the most up to date on some of these stronger storm and severe risks that begin to move through the area. And we have meteorologist staff 24/7 making sure that all of you are prepared here as well. So definitely, and don't get caught off guard tomorrow. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Hope. That's where you can sign up and look there so that you can be prepared for all of this incoming severe weather here as well. So, all right, I'm going to start going through some questions here. Let me go ahead and drink some water here. Definitely been a week where us meteorologists have been talking a lot. So if you haven't been able to tell, let me scroll up here. Yes, thank you guys all very much for joining here. Absolutely happy to help here, Donna. Any specific questions here? Yeah, Jonathan, definitely not ideal for our for our farmers, and it's not, and even the heavy rain. We really need to see this pattern kind of subside here, which we're looking at more towards the second or third week of August, but. I do think that is always a concern with these damaging wind events, especially as we get into, the later of the growing season for corn here, as well as you start to see these lines roll through. So not ideal for sure. Maureen, widespread power outages. I do think typically with storm clusters of this intensity, that's possible. I would say that due to the recent rainfall that we have seen across the area, I think that heightens the potential for downed trees, which usually correlates with some of those power outages as well. So I definitely think that will be a concern here. Let me see here. Yeah, hail. I do think it's a risk. In the main line as well, and any of those couple of those cells that we can maybe see fire from Cincinnati to Columbus. Maureen, I would say that in general, I think that for these types of setups, typically damaging winds are more of the primary threat. Of course, stronger cells or embedded cells within that main line can produce hail. But in my opinion, I think the damaging wind risk is more of the concern. Scrolling through here, looking at rainfall totals, that's actually a really, really good idea here. Let me go ahead and toggle that for you. And again, the issue with model for rainfall totals here is that it's greatly going to depend on where the cluster evolves and moves. So right now, I would say our confidence is pretty high that this is going to be a northwest to southeast system, that there's definitely going to be a swath of widespread rain, 1/2 inch to 1 inch here. I would say that given the fact that these storm clusters typically move a little bit faster here and are not these scattered downpours that sit across the area, I do think that the rainfall totals might be a little bit more straightforward, and that 1/2 inch to 1 inch locally up to 1.5. I know for many of us, that's definitely not something we're wanting, but I do think optimistically that the line moving through a little bit quicker can help keep the flash flooding risks a little bit more localized, at least for locations north of the I-70 corridor here. Now, and the reason I say north of the I-70 corridor here, again, this is the rainfall totals within the past 3 days. South of I-70 here, Terre Haute, Bloomington, a lot of locations here, even last night from Salem to Louisville, cashing in on at least 3 to 5 inches of rain. Saw a few reports come in of near 8, but based on radar measurement. So there's definitely concerns, even if we can see a quick 1.5 to 2 inches down here with some of these scattered storms along the Ohio River, that can be enough to go ahead and start that flash flooding process all up again. So definitely something that we will need to watch here. This is another great tool that we have, by the way, synopticwx.com for any of you weather enthusiasts or just wanting to get kind of a good idea as to what the meteorologists are looking at in terms of weather data and weather models here. I actually can click around and sample the amount of rain that the model is projecting. And one cautionary thing about the models, especially for these types of patterns, they do struggle a little bit with exact rainfall totals. So that's why we're here working at Clarity and BAM Weather to interpret the data. But a really awesome new feature that we rolled out a few months ago has been great for our lives, but also our video updates as well. Jonathan, destructive winds in the Chicago area. I do think that since the storms are going to be rolling through in the late morning hours, I know that a lot of times there can be a little bit of weakening, with a lot of the AM storms that we've seen in the past. In this particular situation, I would say that I think there still can be strong to severe gusts along the leading edge. I know that it doesn't look like this, 6 hours later, but I do think that given how organized this cluster is supposed to be, I do think we can at least see some 60-mile-per-hour winds rolling through the greater Chicagoland area here for sure. Let me go ahead and look here. A flash flood watch for Ohio. I can't speak on what the National Weather Service may or may not do in that regard. I can tell you that internally, our meteorologists have talked about something again for southern Indiana, southwestern Ohio, again, just given that recent rain. But I do think that is a consideration as well. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm getting some questions for Sunday. I will kind of get into Sunday here in just a second. Kelly, I want to be, let me answer it to you this way here. So Kelly asked a good question. Stronger type tornadoes or more brief spin ups? So I would describe it as typically when we're looking at these lines of storms, there can be, the tornadoes are brief in nature as they roll through. But the concern here is that even if they're brief or weaker, like on the scale of EF0, EF1, straight line damaging winds or wind gusts of 70 plus, that is a weak tornado. So I definitely think that particular criteria alone, whether it is an embedded brief tornado or a area where there can be a swath of damaging winds, I would say that there's going to be a risk for, unfortunately, damage as a result of that, as this line begins to evolve and push more to the west to the east here. Phil, no problem at all here. Let me go ahead and run through the timing one more time here on the simulated radar, and then I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about what we're looking at for Sunday. I do want to bring up that for Sunday's severe risk, a lot of that depends on how our Saturday severe risk evolves. If there can be any lingering boundaries or any areas where there can still be some ongoing storms that can greatly influence the pattern here. So let me go ahead and jump back. And while I'm resetting this here, I want to go ahead and show our severe risk map again and remind you guys to go ahead and sign up for Clarity, because this is not only where we have these great graphics and nowcasts, but we're doing videos for the region twice a day. So it's not just talking about your specific area, but if you're planning to travel, if you're planning to go somewhere, that's where we're discussing it usually the next 24 to 48 hours in great detail. So I definitely want you all to take advantage of that. $99 a year. That's a perfect investment to keep you and your family, you and your business safe here. So I'm going to quickly roll back, and we're going to start this up again at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., and 9 a.m. Eastern time frame. You know what? I'll put it in Central time here just as it's in that zone. So 7, 8, 9 Central time frame here, starting to get more into the Milwaukee, Waukegan area, Quad Cities region, which also recently just had a lot of heavy rainfall. I think so far over the past 2 weeks, we hit 8 to 10 based on observed rainfall totals. Don't quote me on that, but I know we're getting very close to 10 here. So, definitely not a good sign, but thankfully it's only going to be through an hour or two. But even as it gets further from northwest to east, pushing into northern Illinois, I do think, again, we can see some strong to severe wind gusts. 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m. Central time, starting to get into the Chicago area here as well. And I do think as the storms get more into the early afternoon as well, they will likely continue to intensify. So Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo as well, starting to push across the lake here. Something that I've also noticed a lot with these line of storms or storm clusters here is that this particular activity, along the northern edge of the line going over the lake, will actually move a little bit faster than the other parts of the storm. That's because it's moving over water. So as a result, there might be a little bit of earlier times for southwestern Michigan, still going to keep those damaging wind gusts in play, but a risk to keep an eye on here for sure. 12 p.m., 1 p.m., 2 p.m. Central time frame here, and I'll go ahead and flip this over. Eastern time frame, so that's just west of Kokomo, west of Fort Wayne, more towards the Crawfordsville area and down towards Effingham and Vandalia, Illinois. That's at 3 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Central time frame here. I would definitely favor at this time, this is where we would favor the greatest corridor of damaging wind gusts of 70 plus to exist across the area. Again, few isolated pockets of hail and some tornadoes will be in play, but that's the latest in terms of timing. Now, again, and I'll go ahead and circle this, two areas here to note. Again, I do think that we might be able to see this line extend a little bit further to the west towards St. Louis, and some pop-up scattered supercells that can form across eastern Indiana and western Ohio that would have the better potential for the hail and a few tornadoes here. Again, that's a very conditional risk. But regardless, there is going to be some scattered storms and downpours that are going to be popping up out ahead of this main line here. Now, I'm going to continue to take us through 4 p.m., hitting Indianapolis, 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. Eastern time frame, starting to work through the state, approaching the Ohio River and into western Ohio. And again, just to say this again, you guys are going to get tired of me repeating this, but the radar, if you start to see it weaken in terms of colors and you start to see less of the reds and purples, that does not necessarily correlate with the wind gust potential decreasing. I do think there can be some weakening, but I think that we really need to pay attention to a gust front that can form along or out ahead of this line of storms that can still be capable of producing at least 60 mile per hour wind gusts. So definitely a risk that we'll need to be watching. 7, 8, and 9 p.m. Eastern time frame here, we start to see the storms break apart a little bit more across central into eastern Kentucky and into eastern Ohio. Now, again, there still can be a few stronger gusts, Pittsburgh, Morgantown, all the way down here, but I think in general the storm risks start to break apart. Now, in order to figure out the Sunday severe risk here a little bit, I do want to mention a couple other risks, and I'm going to switch this back to central time frame here. I do think for those of us that are back into Illinois here, northern Illinois and into eastern Iowa, there is an area of additional scattered downpours and storms that can redevelop. More so the case if this line of storms advances even quicker to the east. It'll give more time for the atmosphere to reload. Now, confidence is very low on how this is going to evolve. I'm going to use one of our latest simulated radars to kind of depict how I think this might end up and what my gut tells me here, how this can evolve. So as we get back into the evening, overnight hours here, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Sunday, I do think that there's a couple areas we need to watch. Some additional scattered storms, maybe a broken line can form here, eastern Indiana, southern Ohio, northern Kentucky. But we are definitely favoring there to be an uptick in widespread shower and storm coverage into eastern Iowa and northwestern Illinois. Again, Sunday, 2 a.m. Central Time. At this point, it's too early for me to get into details as to, is this going to be a storm cluster? Is it going to be damaging winds of 70 plus again? Are we just going to rinse and repeat? But this type of pattern would suggest that there's another widespread corridor of heavy rain and thunderstorms that's likely going to push through as we get between that 6 to 8 a.m. Central time frame or 7 to 9 a.m. Eastern time frame across the northern half of Illinois and northern half of Indiana as we get into the Sunday time frame. Now, again, we're going to have to adjust the exact quarters of this, and I do think there can be a few stronger gusts, but definitely going to be another shot of unwelcome precipitation for some of these zones as this activity pushes in here. Great question here. I'm going to pivot back to the severe risk map, and then I want to show you guys something fun from earlier this week. But at this point, I would still say this is for Saturday, so late Saturday morning into Saturday night here. I do think that we can see some damaging wind gusts of 60 to 70 plus, more in the likely zone here, and including some isolated hail and a few embedded tornadoes. The yellow zone, definitely thinking it's going to be more of a widespread risk for the wind gusts of 60, but I think the tornado and hail risks are pretty low end. I think they're isolated. If I had to choose one particular area, it would be Cincinnati, Dayton, northwest of Columbus, where I think we can see a few of those brief spin-ups happen as a result of any type of scattered supercells that can form. Your green areas, I think those are more of the outlying regions. Definitely a few stronger gusts possible. I'm just not seeing as much of a hail tornado risk here for those zones as a result here. So another added benefit I want to talk about here with clarity as well, and I really want a big shout out to our meteorologist team. This was the map that we had on Monday highlighting these storm cluster risks, 4 or 5 days in advance. So, and these patterns are very tricky to forecast for, but this is the type of value that for those of you that sign up for Clarity Home, Clarity Pro, Clarity Business, Clarity Ag, you will be able to see these types of risk maps in advance. Now, obviously, this is trended a little bit further to the south, but 4 or 5 days ago, this is kind of our general thinking. And as you can see here, again, a little bit, further to the south here towards the Ohio River, but gave a general idea for what we were looking at for sure. So, want to also go ahead and shout out one of our partners on here, 811. Know what's below, call before you dig. And unfortunately, I do think that there's going to be some situations where we're going to be seeing some storm damage as we get into this weekend. And in every state, it's free. Give them a call as you're cleaning things up, or make sure any of the contractors or guys you got helping out are utilizing that to ensure that everyone's staying safe and locating those marks here. So I will take a few more questions here, and then we'll kind of wrap up. Cleveland area, I would say, yes, I do think that the storms will be a little bit more weaker as they push into eastern Ohio, but I would still expect there to be, and I'll go ahead and populate this here back in. I do think that we can see at least a couple gust fronts that can be along the leading edge anywhere from 6 to, I would say, 9 p.m. Eastern time at this point, of some 50 to 60 mile per hour winds. So not a lot of rain, I would say, so to speak, half an inch or less, but I do think there can still be a few stronger gusts associated with that activity here. I was waiting for that question here. Could this be a derecho? I would say that there is potential that if we can see a very limited amount of storms out ahead of this in the morning, like even less than what the simulated radar is showing, I do think that it's possible. I'm not ready to go that route yet. I definitely think it's going to be a storm cluster with damaging winds of 60 to 70 plus. But I would say at this point, I want to wait until I see the afternoon waves before I officially say, yep, I think this is a derecho potential. It's possible, but we're not necessarily going that route just yet here. Let's take a look here. Yeah, and so in southern Wisconsin here, I'll kind of go through this line here a little bit further. I would say that that's kind of on one of those, to answer your question, Nathan, it's right on the leading edge to the northeast here as this wave works in during the morning hours here. I do think it can be a little bit more organized into a line. I would expect 50 mile per hour gusts and some lightning to work through here, but I think the greater potential for damaging winds will rest a little bit further to the south. So it's going to be a close call, but definitely if you've got friends up there, let them know they are going to get storms tomorrow morning. So Cade, will there be any more of these next week? I would say at this point, we are looking at another potential system as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday here. I'll go ahead and actually pull that up here. And I'm going to quickly use this as my location for Indianapolis here. This is an example for where especially our pro and business users have access to all of our maps that we post out ahead of time and before you see them even on the live stream here. This is to highlight this Sunday severe potential. This is from this morning here where we're looking at, again, that potential for another wave that can dive a little bit more to the southeast. Right now, it's not looking as impressive as Saturday's, but definitely going to be some severe risks there as well. And a great example of how you can access this into clarity here. I'm going to check and see if I have the updated map that we just put out, that one of our updated meteorologists put out. I don't see it just yet, but just to draw on that here as to where we're looking at, I'll kind of advance out here a little bit more. Here's a perfect example. Now, simulated radar, so take this with a grain of salt here. I wouldn't say that I necessarily agree with this, but there is a wave that's going to be associated with a low pressure system as we get into Tuesday, into Wednesday, that would be in this corridor here. So definitely something that we'll need to watch here as a result. But at this point, I would say that in general, in this particular situation, a little bit too far out for exact details. Any other questions here that I can help answer? Give it a couple more minutes here. All right, perfect. Well, guys, we will continue to post updates here on social media as we get a little bit closer to this event. Again, this is our favored severe risk map. We'll continue to keep you posted on this activity as well. Again, share this with a friend. Make sure that your family that's in the path of the storm is well aware of this. And what would be even better is to getting them to sign up for Clarity. So I'll hope if you can put that in the link one more, or the comments feed here one more time, we can go ahead and share that. And real quickly, one last time here, I'm going to speed through this. Here's our latest in terms of timing here. So 11 a.m. Eastern time frame, starting to get into the northern half of Illinois and Chicago. Pushing into northwestern Indiana here, western Michigan, and central Illinois around 2 p.m. Eastern time. Hitting just east of Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, and north of Evansville around 4 p.m. Eastern time frame. And then 7 p.m. Eastern time frame, getting into more of the Columbus, Dayton, Cincinnati, and Louisville. So that's our latest in terms of timing. For those of you that are just joining or may have missed this, you'll be able to see the full replay here once we sign off here for sure. But thank you all for watching. Sign up for Clarity. Keep paying attention to these social media pages. We'll continue to have updates. Have a fantastic and safe start to your weekend.